Russia building up cooperation with several African countries across the continent. Now, do African countries welcome these developing relations?
I think so. I think yes, because to hear it from many African ambassadors here, really they are welcome. Russia is welcome, though of course it's coming a bit late than the other big powers.
Russia has been accused of neo-colonialism and of seeking to expand its influence there. Do you think that is the case? And if not, who stands to benefit from driving a wedge between Russia and Africa?
In the first place, who is accusing? Who is accusing Russia? It's really amazing. Those countries who accuse Russia, who might accuse Russia, are the ones who have been there for long and as neo-colonialists and colonialists, I think. They are afraid of Russia competing with them now in Africa. Except that the approach of Russia should differ very much from their approach.
What is their approach like?
No, it's so far, for the last 50 years, or even more. Previously it was colonial, and afterwards it was a neo-colonial. I didn't see the difference. And Africa, for the last 50 years, it didn't get anything from them. It remained where it was 50 years ago. I remember reading, I don't know where exactly, that in the 60s, two African countries, the Sudan and Ghana, they were on the same level as South Korea at that time. So where are they now? These two African countries, and where is Korea now? Why? Because they invested intensively in South Korea, whereas they didn't do that in Africa.
Why do you think they didn't do that in Africa?
I don't know, maybe for them it's better that Africa remains only the source of raw materials.
What do you think they're so afraid of with Africa becoming stronger, for example, by them investing more, Africa becoming stronger?
Of course, there will be less dependence on them. It means if Africa will develop.
So why do you think we're still seeing the issue of neo-colonialism so prevalent in Africa?
No, one thing is, we don't have to blame the colonial powers only. We have to blame also the African countries. Did they try in the last 50 years to get rid of them? Not many of them. I mean, especially the leaders. But Africa is now awakening. There will be a new Africa. So they are free now to trade with whomever they want. That's why Russia could be welcome, Russia or China. I think there are vast areas where we can cooperate with Russia, be it in the security sector, trade sector, economic sector, and defense sector, or for that matter also in other areas. Everything is open. It's only that potentially Eritrea has the biggest, maybe one of the biggest potash fertilizers. In fact, recently, about 3 days ago, I think, an agreement was signed with China for the exploitation of it. And it will be operational in the next, the cooperation with Russia could be very important in the agricultural sector also, be it in the transfer of know-how, in the transfer of raising the productivity.
You've mentioned China twice so far already, and China, of course, is the most important partner for Eritrea, from what I understand. Could Russia compete in that aspect? Or maybe that's not even, competition is not a thing in this area and it's just Western rhetoric. What would you say?
Why not? In Eritrea, there is enough to do for both countries if they try to invest. And the competition is not, I think, even among friends there is competition. Many countries, even members of the European Union, they compete among themselves also to win more markets in other countries. So why not? Also Russia and China could compete in this, but it doesn't mean that there is no enough room for two of them.
Let's talk about the United Nations, moving on to the crisis with Ukraine. We saw that Eritrea was one of the countries that did not vote against Russia at the UN. What were you guided by when making that decision? And were you not perhaps fearful of the sanctions that could come in, imposed as a means of punishment for not voting against Russia?
A small country like Eritrea is under sanctions for so many years. No help from them, no nothing. So there is nothing to lose from this vote that we have done, except to gain. At least we have kept our principle. We are not pleased with all the manipulations done at the United Nations. This double standard, blaming the others for the same thing, while if on the first place they are the ones to blame. They have no right to blame others, because what they are doing in other countries, nothing has been done. Even the issue hasn't been raised in that. So Eritrea is against these double standards.
Sanctions that are imposed aren't having the effect that Western countries would like. So why do you think they continue with this policy of enforcing sanctions that we then see don't have their desired effect?
That's one point I don't understand myself. So because, as I know, they are suffering also from these sanctions themselves. In the final analysis, sanctions don't work. Be it here, especially with Eritrea, there is a small country which has we don't contribute much to the world economy, but sanctions on us, we are managing it for the last 20 years because we don't export, we only import. And the market is there also if you want it. If they don't sell us, there are other markets also. Russia has done also now. They have imposed sanctions on Russia, but there are other markets also. They didn't expect that we can, that the regime will outlive these sanctions. Even, in 2-3 weeks, this regime will fall, they say. But it happened that it has lasted more than they expected, and we have overcome many of the sanctions.
How did you manage to do that?
So our people, when they saw that there was nobody to help them, they depended on themselves. And this principle is working until now. The contribution of the diaspora, the contribution of the people in resisting these sanctions and the outside pressure is big in my country. So we have developed this tradition of resistance, resisting outside pressure.
We've also seen how the West sort of cherry picks what to show about what's happening around the world. For example, when we saw the crisis in Ukraine unfold, at the same time there was a crisis happening in neighboring Ethiopia, which was totally ignored. And it was on a scale much larger than what we see happening in Ukraine. Why do you think that is? Why are they ignoring issues in countries like Ethiopia, but not in countries like Ukraine?
But I think maybe they didn't completely ignore it, because they were demonizing the Ethiopian regime. They were supplying and helping the rebels there, the rebel province there, and demonizing my country also for that it was committing crimes and all these things until now. With us, they never stopped demonizing our president and our country. They didn't completely recognize it. Maybe it wasn't as widely spoken of as that of the Ukraine, because here in Ukraine they are deeply involved. So,
but why do they want to demonize your country?
Because this is the problem with the African countries also, what they do. Even now they will face problems, those who will try to go their own way. We have been opposing this diktat of theirs for the last, since we started fighting. We want to go our own way, so they don't like that. That is our main sin. Any country who wants to go its own way is not allowed to do so in Africa. They have to show you the way. This is the right way to go. So that's our only sin. And we will continue to go our own way because those who are going the way they were told to go, they are still there. They are still there. They didn't move an inch from where they were.
Can you give me some examples?
Many. Africa at itself, Africa. So we have learned from that also. Africa is awakening now.
Why do you've said that already, that Africa is awakening now. What do you attribute that to? Why is it awakening now?
The new generation is different from that of the old generation. It could be that. And the inside pressure, the youth who are looking for work, who are looking for jobs, looking for better standards of living and educational opportunities, they are not finding it. So they are trying to analyze why is it so. So maybe they come to a conclusion it's because of this neo-colonial policies of some countries.
What is the regional situation like right now, also with neighbor in Ethiopia?
The situation with, I think it's now stabilizing, and we hope it will continue to stabilize. Though of course you can't say definitely that peace is achieved, because it depends on many external factors also. There are those powers who don't like to see peace in that area also. But we hope they will be compelled also, or maybe they will recognize that peace is necessary in that area also.
Who is they?
The West, mostly the West. Those countries who are, it is the West which is supporting the Tigray regime and who is demonizing us, who is intervening in that area,
And you said they failed. How did they fail?
Because the rebels they were supporting, they are now completely defeated. They came to sign a peace agreement with the Ethiopian government. And now they are giving their weapons back to the federal government. They couldn't fight. They were totally defeated. All the support they were getting from the outside world was, from mainly the United States and its allies.
Does Eritrea need outside support?
The right thing the right terms in Africa to use now when we approach Africa, countries who want to do business with Africa, their approach should be, they should avoid these words like help. Instead of help, partnership. This word is very important now in the country. We will help you, or aid and help. These things are not. We want to make partnership with you. Partnership. This word could make a change in Africa. So the approach. That's why the Chinese are now in all the countries of Africa. Their approach is different from that of the ex-colonial powers. And Russia could do the same also. It will treat them as partners, and it could succeed also.
So basically not to portray African countries like victims constantly in need of help.
Yes, in need of help. Whenever there are these organizations, non-governmental organizations, when they collect money in the name of Africa, the children, the hungry children, they are all Africans, Africa, in the name of Africa. This is how they portray Africa. So the approach should be different. For any country to succeed, I mean, or be it Russia, China, or maybe India is now also approaching, or Turkey is also approaching Africa.
You've mentioned that Western countries are losing their influence in Africa right now. What are Africa's new preferred alliances?
I think Africans want to deal with all the countries in the world. They don't want to be treated to deal with those countries who don't accept them as their equals. So they will deal with those countries who will deal with them as their equals, who will treat them as their equals.
China is one of them.
China is one of them, probably.
What other countries treat
Why not
Africa?
Russia also? Russia. I hear also the policy is also, that is the policy also, to treat them on equal terms also with Africa, to create partnership, not this neo-colonial mentality.
So you don't see Russia as having neo-colonialist notes in its attitude towards Eritrea. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I hope so, because Russia wasn't a colonial power also. And Russia, not Russia exactly, but when we speak of the Soviet Union also, for the people in Africa, it's the same as Russia. So there is this memory of this helping, which we used to help the liberation movements. And so it has got this good name also, it could make use of it. And Russia is not a neo-colonial colonial power also. It hasn't got, it didn't have a colony in Africa at least, or nowhere also, as far as I know.
Eritrea still has a Soviet military base that's no longer working, and there are no plans to restore it. But is there a possibility of a military cooperation with Eritrea? You mentioned before security, defense. In what way could Eritrea and Russia cooperate in terms of the military?
You know, the fact that there was a military base in the islands of Dahlak, it wasn't our choice. Eritrea has nothing to do with that. It was under occupation. So it was the military regime, which was getting help from the Soviet Union, which gave the Soviets, and it was used against us also, against us. And there was another base also in Asmara, communication base, which the emperor gave to the United States. It was there until the event of Sputnik, when Sputnik appeared, so they had to leave it. I mean, the military regime told them to leave also. So it wasn't our choice. And the policy, that firm policy of Eritrea is not to have foreign base on its soil. But military cooperation will be there, I'm sure. All the equipment that we have is either Soviet-made or Russian-made. Before independence, when we were fighting, there was no country which was supplying us. We used to capture lots of weapons, even as far as tanks afterwards. So we are used to Soviet weapons. We were used, and there is this culture of using Soviet. And after that, we bought, I mean, after independence also, we bought several, when we were fighting in Ethiopia, also we bought some pilots, I mean, airplanes, warplanes, I mean, MiGs and SUS, and other defense weapons from here. So this cooperation has been going on for the last 20 years. There were Russian experts coming to Eritrea just to to teach our people there. So it will continue even now, maybe even on a bigger scale, maybe.
Why do you say maybe on a bigger scale?
No, because of the situation. Now we have to build our system, our defense system, to have a stronger defense system, maybe. So on that, and now because we are free to buy, there are no sanctions. Russia also sanctioned us because of the United Nations. Russia, as a big power, couldn't violate also the resolutions of the Soviet. So it was difficult for us, even when we were fighting with Ethiopia, to buy arms from here. It was difficult. Russia didn't allow us. But now the sanctions have been lifted here, so we will buy all the equipments for the marine, for the marine force or the air defense systems. So that's why I say maybe on a bigger scale also.
Is that something that's already planned? Have you had conversations about acquiring more?
Yes, the discussions are underway because we have the latest or the best weapons. It's a matter of provided we have the money or the I think Russia will sell us anything that we'd like to have now.
In general, we're seeing this tendency of Africa and African countries becoming more dominant in the worldwide arena. Do you think, is there a chance of Africa becoming a dominant force in the next few years, perhaps a couple of decades? Is that a reality? Is that possible?
Maybe not a dominant force, I wouldn't say that, but Africa would have a bigger voice. Yeah? Bigger influence in the future, because even 54 countries, 54 members of the United Nations are from Africa, so that adds to that also. It's not easy. And Africa is also developing at a fast rate, economically, I mean. So maybe it will use this leverage also for having a bigger say in the United Nations or in the world as a whole.
Is there no fear as Africa develops faster and faster that perhaps the West will try and put a pause to that or to stop it, as we've seen happen in history, in the past with other countries?
It's natural because any growth in Africa is less dependence on those countries. So they would like to have bigger influence as they feel. So that Africa depends on them. Africa should remain a market for them. That's what they want. They would like to see. But things don't go that way. It's natural that Africa will develop.
So how can you prevent that from happening again? How can you prevent that so that Africa continues its growth and stays there without outside interference, manipulation?
I think by strengthening the African Union. It's very difficult also because they will do their best also to have a bigger, to influence Africa. Africa will also try to not to be so dependent on them. Instead of, for example, let's say, instead of exporting raw materials, Africa could start exporting semi-finished products. Then afterwards, also finished products. Why only the raw materials? Raw materials, you don't get anything from that. So in that way, Africa could move to self-dependency, self-sufficiency, and self.
How long do you think that could take to self-sufficiency?
Provided there is a will, it could take a shorter time. I see now many countries, as I mentioned, in South Korea, it didn't take it long, and also even China. China is now a leading world power now, economic power, big economic power. with the reforms it did, now it's where it is. So it's very difficult to predict. But by working hard, by making reforms and having the right policy, I think it will take a shorter time. But I can't say how long it will take.